What is going on, all of you speedy hedgehogs on hoverboards out there in the world? I am Mega Amster. Thank you for watching this review video. Whether you are a new or returning viewer, I appreciate you stopping by. And today, I am talking about my time that I spent very recently as of this recording. I literally just wrapped it up yesterday, playing Sonic Riders Zero Gravity for the very first time. Apologies for the chunky looking trailer here. This is the original trailer off of YouTube from SEGA of Europe because I didn't feel like setting up the Wii because I don't know how I would talk and hold my Wii remote like this way because my Wii motion sensor bar is over here. So anyways, that out of the way, hopefully the chunky footage gets the point across. This game was released on the Wii and the PS2 in 2008, I believe. Definitely correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. This is a sequel to the original Sonic Riders, which came out in 2006 across pretty much all Xbox, PS2, and GameCube. Did I say PS3? I think this game was actually PS2. I know it was Wii for sure. That is the version that I played for this video, and I've owned it for a few years now. I bought it at a retro game shop a few years ago, and I love the original Sonic Riders. I grew up playing that game. It was a fun racing game to have. It was tough as hell, but especially for younger me. But now I've finally gotten to experience the last remaining Sonic Riders game I'd also played, Free Riders, being Zero Gravity, which I had heard decent things about this one. I wanted to jump into it, and like overall, before I get into the details, I'll probably do a non-spoiler section first, and then spoilers a little bit. There's not a ton to spoil, I guess mainly like story beats and maybe some unlockable characters I'll leave for the spoiler section. But overall, non-spoiler thoughts, it's a fun time. It's a fun game. It does some interesting stuff to attempt to improve upon the gameplay mechanics of Sonic Riders, the original, while also still feeling fresh. And I guess we can talk about just the concept in terms of the story overall. I'm not gonna, like I said, most of this is gonna be for spoiler section. But you know, I enjoyed my time. The story's like nothing super like amazing to write home about. I mean, it's a Sonic game first of all, but also it's a Sonic racing game. The original Sonic Rider story was pretty basic, just mainly introducing the Babylon Rogues as characters of their own, giving them some backstory. And here the story does kind of connect to them a little bit, but it's also kind of its own thing. It takes place in a more futuristic environment, and essentially there are these gadgets, these arcs of the cosmos they're called, that allow the characters to see what you're seeing here. There's different abilities that allows them to essentially drift and also like gain a lot of speed. I guess I'll go into that a little bit since there's not much to the story. Eggman's involved, of course. But in terms of the gameplay here, the main new gimmicks here, besides of course being a racing game with hoverboards, instead of the air meter gauge, which the original game had and is kind of a controversial topic, I personally really like the air meter gauge from the original Sonic Riders. I think it's pretty strategic in how you can utilize it, but I can understand why, especially for younger players, it's annoying. This game ditches the air meter gauge entirely and instead has a speed gauge that can be filled up by obtaining gravity points, which is kind of like air as well. You do tricks to gain gravity points, and you can spend gravity points to do different techniques. So first of all, you have, what is it even called? It's essentially the drift in this game. It's like a gravity move where everything becomes slow-mo and you can turn more freely, and then once you let go, you boost off in that direction. It's essentially a glorified drift, and honestly, I don't love this mechanic. It's kind of pointless. I don't know, because we had the regular drifting technique in the original Sonic Riders, which really isn't present here, and is instead replaced by whatever this gravity shift maybe. I forget what it's called. Let me know in the comments below if you happen to remember. It feels kind of pointless to me. It's literally a drift that uses up gauge, and I guess technically the drift in Sonic Riders did use up the gauge as well, so I guess I can't really say that without criticizing the original Sonic Riders. I mean, I don't love how drifting in those games, and both of these games use up your gauge, to be honest. It should just be a gameplay mechanic that's inherent to the game itself. Maybe I've just gotten used to games like Mario Kart where you don't have to spend that kind of energy to use a drift, but here it is tied to that, but it just feels kind of pointless and almost gimmicky to have it be just this new gravity feature when it can literally just be just a drift, right? If you've played arcade racing games before, you know these drifts exist, right? The other new move that I actually do like a lot is the gravity dive, which you like for the Wii Remote. I was playing this with the Wii Remote sideways. That is the normal default control scheme. You can also play this with the GameCube controller and I believe the vertical Wii Remote, although not with a nunchuck. Correct me if I'm wrong about that in the comments, but it wouldn't let me from what I could tell. Essentially, you shake the Wii Remote. You're holding it horizontally if you're playing that way. And it gives you this huge boost called Gravity Dive, which essentially lets you fly forward. It depletes your gravity point gauge, or speed gauge, whatever you want to call it, very quickly. but it can be pretty rewarding and it can actually give you a bit of a boost. So you kind of slow down for a couple seconds in place while it charges up. And so, yeah, people could pass you in the time limit, but then you speed forward for as much gauge as you have. And it's honestly, that is a very strategic new mechanic that I do kind of like. It could be a little finicky, especially with depending on what control scheme you're playing with. But it is definitely can be strategic in that you can zoom past enemies, especially right before a finish line. You can like zoom past a couple places and cross the finish line that way. I've done that a couple times with the races I've done. There's also a neat gimmick with that mechanic specifically where, depending on the section of the stage you use it in, there's like different terrain that will lift up off the ground. Like say you're going through like I think there's a level that has like, oh, for example, there's like a busy street with like trucks and cars passing by. And if you do the gravity dive on that segment of strip of track, like they'll kind of float in the air and you can bounce off of them, and those give you a boost and also keep your meter going. So that is a really cool mechanic that actually is my favorite new addition to this game for sure in terms of gameplay elements. And I think it's honestly pretty neat. It's a little janky to use, but I think it's much better than whatever the drift thing is. I feel like they should have just had that be its own thing and just a drift and not a gravity feature. I don't know. I still do prefer the air meter gauge. I feel like that was a lot more strategic, but also more annoying and stressful as a result for sure. Whereas here it's like the speed gauge is just kind of an additional boost. Whereas like you don't necessarily need it as much. Even if you're out of speed gauge, you can technically still do the drift move, whatever it's called. It's just you don't get a big speed boost once you complete it. But it can still be utilized. So you really don't need the speed gauge to finish a race, whereas you could argue you need to drift and you need the air meter in the original Sonic Riders. So this game is definitely more approachable. This is the easier game of the two, I would definitely say. They definitely wanted to make it a little easier for players, which I think they succeeded with for sure. I think I still prefer the air meter a little more, but the gravity dive in particular is a very cool mechanic. In terms of other features, the track selection, I honestly think the track variety here is really good. It does a similar thing to what the original Sonic Riders does, where each track has like a different variant. There's like a Team Sonic variant and a Team Babylon Rogue variant. It's like the original Sonic Riders. There are two different story modes, Team Sonic, Team Babylon Rogues, that you do go through different events. There's a final boss that I'll save for the spoiler section. But like honestly, first of all, I think there are more tracks. I could be wrong about that. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I want to say there's like 16 tracks total in this game. I think it's 8 per, like 8, and then each one has 2 different variants, including some unlockable ones that are pretty fun. But what I will say is that because of especially Gravity Dive, you really utilize that mechanic on very like straightaway parts of the track, and I feel like levels are less. Like the level design, the track design itself, I feel like is less interesting because it's accounting for you using Gravity Dive. And that's a bit of a bummer. There were definitely a lot of more twists and turns and interesting gimmicks going on with the tracks in the original Sonic Riders, I feel, but I honestly prefer the level variety here. There's like, my favorite is one of these ruined, almost temple track that you explore. I really like that. There's like ice levels, water levels. Is there a desert level? There's plant, like jungle levels, there's like factory levels. You go out into space, there's all sorts of stuff here. Of course, like the futuristic city, kind of like Metal City from the original Sonic Riders, but I feel like I slightly prefer the level theming in this game. Just the track design itself, I honestly prefer in the original Sonic Riders. I think it's more like unique and there's a lot more bends and twists and turns because they don't have to account for the Gravity Dive mechanic like they do in this game, which really relies on those straightaways. So kind of a downside to introducing Gravity Dive, but I do think Gravity Dive itself is an interesting mechanic. But I still prefer how they do it in the original Riders for sure. It's just a lot more, I don't know, it's more unique and engaging that way, I find. More intense though, so it depends on what kind of, racing experience you kind of want. In terms of the characters, there's plenty to choose from. I think there might be even a few more than the original Sonic Riders, but correct me if I'm wrong about that. I will not mention the unlockables. We'll say that for the spoiler section, but there are some cool ones here. And it's not just copy and paste from the original Sonic Riders, which is great to see. It's all honestly quite a few, especially the unlockable characters, like very different ones, which is great to see, especially reminiscent of when this game came out. Post 2006 is all I will say. No more on that until the spoilers. But yeah, story's something super interesting to write home about. I did not really mess around with multiplayer at all. I didn't at all. I didn't play with any friends. But I imagine it's fairly fun. I did mess around with mission mode. I did complete every single mission, and I also did a lot of mission mode back in the original Sonic Riders, and it's a similar ranking system where you can either get in Sonic Riders, I think it was bronze, silver, gold. I think there also was a platinum rank, maybe. Here there's like these different cards you get. So like red is normal, blue is super, extreme is gold. I don't know if there's another one, but like those are like the rankings for like your result from completing a mission. The missions definitely felt more repetitive this time around, and I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since I played the original Sonic Riders. I think the missions in the original Sonic Riders were tied to each level. Definitely correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. Um, but it's your pretty basic run of the mill stuff. Do a lap at a certain amount of time, collect a certain number of rings before crossing the finish line. Um, One thing they'll do sometimes to like change up varieties, like they'll do like, oh, grind this many rails versus do this many air rides, or destroy this many obstacles with a power character, because those elements come back. You have the grinding with certain characters, the flying, the air ride through the rings with certain characters, and like the power characters who will like destroy objects along the path and unlock shortcuts. What is interesting about this game is there are, rather than having abilities tied to specific characters, like for example, Sonic in the original Sonic Riders would be able to grind rails, Tails could use the air ride, Knuckles could punch through boulders. I didn't experiment with it too much because I didn't buy a lot of the extreme gear. For those of you, let me know in the comments below, maybe you've explored more of these options here. The abilities are tied to these like different parts. Essentially how it works, this is also unique for this game, and I don't know if I really like it because it's a little confusing, but each gear essentially has 3 different abilities, some of which include grinding rails, air ride through the rings, and punching through obstacles. But there's also like increasing speed, increasing handling, stuff like that. And it's tied to the extreme gear you use rather than the character. Now, it might be that only certain characters can use certain extreme gear. I don't know for sure, because I didn't, like I said, I didn't really mess around with that. But it is interesting to tie it specifically to these different, like, I think they call them gears that you unlock throughout the race. And the way you unlock them, essentially, you can only, each extreme gear has 3, and you unlock them by gathering rings during the race, which does give more incentive to gathering rings during races, which is great. I really do think that's actually like a smarter idea. And it is interesting because you could open up more possibilities of like, you know, Knuckles being able to grind rails, or like Wave being able to punch through objects, stuff like that. Like they're tied to the extreme gear, the vehicles you use this time around, rather than the characters. And I feel like we've seen that with a lot of racing games in recent times, like Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed did that with the different stats. Same thing with like the newer Mario Kart games. The stats are tied to, mostly, I will say, there's still some tied to the character, but mostly tied to the kart, which is what they were kind of doing here with the different abilities, which is interesting. So it allows for more gameplay variety, you know. That way, it's like if you really want to play as a specific character, you don't have to worry about, oh, I hate doing the air ride with Tails, but I really want to play as Tails. I wish he could grind rails instead. Like, you can do that by selecting the appropriate extreme gear. So it's an interesting kind of concept there. And like I said, it gives more incentive to collecting rings as you race to then slowly buy up those abilities. I don't know if there's probably a set number. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head in terms of unlocking each one while you're in the race, but it's, you know, it's an interesting incentive. So like I said, the game does some interesting stuff to try to improve upon the original game, and I think it does a good amount. I mean, it might just be nostalgia talking, but like I really do like how the original Sonic Riders feels. I will give this game credit. The story's more interesting. The unlockable characters are, I would say, better. Mission mode felt a little more dull, but it's probably because I haven't played the original mission mode in so long, so it's hard for me to compare. The controls were better in the original. That's because I wasn't using a GameCube controller here. I would say the soundtrack might be better. Ungravitify is a fantastic theme, and a lot of the level themes are very good in this game. Trying to think if I'm missing anything else. I feel like that's the majority of stuff I did. I did Grand Prix too. There's only 2 Grand Prix, one for Team Sonic, one for Team Babylon Rogue. So a little lacking in that regard. It would have been nice to have more Grand Prix. I mean, you only have so many courses, so it makes sense, right? There's only 16, I believe it's 16 courses in this game. But if you like the original Sonic Riders, I mean, this game is much more in line with the original Sonic Riders than something like a Sonic Free Riders. So I would definitely give this a shot if you really enjoy the original Riders and haven't played this one yet. I think this is the more accessible game for sure. It introduces some new interesting mechanics, especially like the gravity dive, the idea of like collecting rings and unlocking abilities tied to each extreme gear during races. But, you know, I don't know. I think just because of nostalgia, I definitely prefer the original Riders. But this is still a very good Sonic Riders racing game, and I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're a fan of the original. But with that, that's going to end it for the non-spoiler section here. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to click away. If you have not played this game and you do not want to be spoiled on story, characters, anything like that, I'll give you a few seconds to click away now. All right. Not too much to spoil. The story was a lot better here, right? Like, you had this stupid genie boss, right, that Eggman gets the magic carpet from in the original Sonic Riders. Like, that whole story, even as a kid, I'm like, this is the stupidest story. Didn't really make any sense. This one made more sense, you know, having, of course, Eggman being behind the robots, no-brainer, like, kind of figured. But tying it to the Arc of the Cosmos, giving you gravity abilities because they create the black hole, that's a really neat idea. I feel like the Babylon Rogue stuff was kind of shoehorned in a little bit at the end just to tie it to them somehow, but I guess like they explained it a little bit into how, you know, they were using it as like a hyperdrive for Babylon Garden and all that, and then the robot goes in, takes the Arc of the Cosmos, and fuses with the core and becomes this big old thing. That final boss, by the way, was very annoying and took me multiple tries. I had heard about that growing up. I think I watched a review video at some point growing up, and I heard that the final boss in this game was kind of annoying, but so was the one in the original Sonic Riders, so neither were great. It's just tough to do a boss fight in a racing game. You know, that could be really tricky, so it's like, how do you do that properly? It felt like a Sonic boss, but it was just like a little janky, and like, especially with the controls, I was using the horizontal Wii remote. That really didn't help when it came to like turning, like tight turns and stuff, and then using the gravity dive at the appropriate times, but I eventually got it. And yeah, like I said, the level variety I honestly prefer here. The Gigan Rocks, I think, is my favorite track. That's the one I was briefly mentioning in the non-spoiler part. There's some good level variety, though. I love the ice level, like jungle levels, the water level that reminds me of Water Palace from Sonic Rush. Like, I love that kind of stuff. The like factory levels, whatever they're called, didn't love as much. The final boss level, like racetrack, is literally just a vertical strip because of gravity dive. However, it's called Mobius strip, so they know what they're doing. But like I said, you sacrifice some more interesting racetrack design for mechanics like gravity dive to really be pulled off efficiently. No one, na 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 na. Yeah, I love the song. It's a good version of it too from the original Riders. And yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I could talk about. The characters, really, I mean, the characters here are really good. I love having Blaze and Silver here. They still brought back like Rouge, Shadow, Cream from the original Sonic Riders. They're here. They got rid of the kind of default generic looking robots from Sonic Riders, and you can play as one of the robots from this game, which is cool. No Metal Sonic, would have loved to see that. But everybody else, Eggman, Team Sonic, Babylon Rogues, Amy, everybody's there. And the Sega unlockable characters. I believe the Sonic Riders original characters were Knights, Ulala, and Ai. Here we've got Knights coming back, which is great, but also Samba de Amigo. We got Amigo from Samba de Amigo and Billy Hatcher, which was interesting timing, but I guess when the original Sonic Riders was in development, maybe they weren't aware or they didn't cross over with Billy Hatcher. I don't even know when Billy Hatcher came out. Let me know in the comments below, but he is in this game, and he does like the little sound effects from the game, which is really cool. I don't know if Amigo or Knights do that, but they're cool additions to the roster. I did not unlock Supersonic, whether in this game or the original. It's just, I don't love the idea of getting like the highest rank on every single mission in the mission mode. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Once I beat the mission, I felt good, and then I moved on. And, you know, doing all that unlocks the Sega characters, which is great. Speaking of Sega, the special Sega crossover tracks here were interesting. At first, I thought I liked them more than the ones in the original, but honestly, looking back on it, they really just are city levels with, like, posters and billboards of, like, Sega IPs. There's one based on Sega in the 80s and one based on Sega in the 90s. I definitely prefer the 90s one. It takes place at night, too, which is really cool, but it has all that. But the original, of course, had the... I didn't know there were two variants of it in the original. I only knew of the one, being the one that had, like, Monkey Ball, Billy Hatcher, Crazy Taxi, Samba de Amigo, like, all, like, inspired and meshed into one track. Like, that was a really cool idea. That's really not what this game does. They're just, like, city levels, which are still good. They're good city levels, but they just have, like, Sega IP, like, propaganda spattered everywhere, but they look cool, and they're fun. They're definitely some of my favorites, but like I said, Gigan Rocks is really fun. Yeah, honestly, I think that's gonna do it for this review. I guess who's my favorite character? I mean, Shadow, fantastic with the skates. I love Shadow with the skates. Honestly, Blaze being here is awesome. Silver too. Out of the Sega characters, I probably like maybe Amigo. I do like Amigo's great. He's great. But they're all pretty good. Yeah, it's honestly a good package. Very short game, but if you're into like that arcade racing style, and if you've played the original Riders, would definitely recommend it. It's been funny actually. I didn't intend to play these games like before Sonic Racing CrossWorlds came out. This is gonna date this video, but it just kind of worked. I went back. I played the original Sonic and Sega All Stars Racing again too. So like kind of getting to experience the previous inspirations for what will be in CrossWorlds is interesting timing. And this is a good one. I'm glad I finally got to experience it as a Sonic fan who's trying to play every single Sonic game at some point. Like another one off the list, and it's a fun time. There are some things I don't love about it. I guess just to wrap up this overall review as we end this video. Some of the new mechanics I don't love, and some of the simplifications I actually don't love. And especially with like track design and like the drifting I didn't love. But like aesthetically, this is definitely, I prefer this game aesthetically to the original, with like the characters and the track design and everything and the story. But like core gameplay, I think I prefer the original Sonic Riders, probably due to nostalgia. But like still, like this is a very fun game, more accessible. So honestly, if you thought Riders the original was too frustrating, this might be the one to jump into and just check it out and see what you think, because these are very stylish games. They're very unique in their own sense of how they handle the racing arcade genre, and I would definitely get a recommend for me. But with that is going to do it for this not so speedy review of Sonic Riders Zero Gravity for the Nintendo Wii. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you play this game, what do you think about it compared to the overall series? What do you think about the new mechanics they introduced, the new characters? Let's try to keep it spoiler free if possible. I know it's a Sonic racing game that's almost 20 years old, but bear with me here. And let me know if you're excited for Sonic Racing CrossWorlds while we're at in the comments below. But with that, I'll catch you all on the next video or live stream. And until then, keep on racing.